Hello, welcome to week 4, lab 4. In this one, we're going to talk over about finalizing an object, putting a scene together, and then we're going to talk about lighting, materials, and lights, and making a nice render in Arnold. So we're going to end up making something like this. Nice little image, will look cool, and that's what we're going to do. So firstly, open up your battleship if you haven't already. Feel free to use the one I've provided if you haven't kept up. But what we're going to do first anyway is we're going to finalize this object. So we're going to make it one object that we can import into another scene. So to do that, I'm just going to get rid of that first, this background plane that we're using. So I'm just selecting it and deleting it. What we're going to do is first I'm going to highlight everything, right click, convert to editable poly. And what that's going to do is every object on here is now collapsing the modifier stack, and it's now just one editable poly. So we usually don't like doing this with objects that we're working on because now I can't go back. Like there's hundreds of polygons. This is not really a model I could work with anymore. But that doesn't matter because I'm not going to need to work with it in theory. I'm just taking it into another scene and rendering it. So now what I'm going to select the base. And over here, we've got attach. And what that's going to let me do is click on all of the other parts, and it's going to make it all one object. So I'm just clicking all of them. 3ds Max is a little awkward. As far as I'm aware, there's still no way to do this instantly with everything. So you can see I'm kind of awkwardly clicking each little piece here just so that it joins up and makes one object. And there we go. So now I have one object. This is just one piece, which is great. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to save this file. I'm going to call it something else. I don't want to save over my working one. Usually I'll have something saved as working, so I'll just call it like battleship_working, and that'll be the one I'm working with that I can go back on, make changes to. So let's just call this one Battleship Final. I'm going to save that. Okay, so now I've got a 3ds Max file with only this battleship piece that I can import into another file. So I want you to open up the Hat and Iron 3ds Max file. If you've got it in the same, don't worry if you've got one file with everything in it, that's fine. All you'll need to do is finalize each object, so just convert them into an editable poly and attach everything. That's okay. Oh, I just noticed I forgot 2 bits there. There we go. And I yeah, I've only got one object in the whole scene now. That's fine. Yeah, just forgot those 2 bits. So as I was saying, if you have one 3ds Max file with your other pieces in it, that's fine. Just convert them to an editable poly and make them one object and work from there. In this instance, I'm going to open my file, which is Hat and Iron _high poly. So I'm just going to open that now. Yep, I'll keep it safe. And I'm going to open my Hat and Iron. Okay. Now I'm just going to finalize this object, highlight all of them, right click, convert to editable poly. Okay, and this one I'm going to go attach and attach that part just so they're one object. I'm going to attach these together because then they'd be one object. I want these 2 separate. I've got a hidden cylinder there. Oh, that's an old one. If you're using this file, that hidden cylinder, just delete that hat. I could see it on the hierarchy there. Okay, so we now have 2 separate objects here, which is great. Make sure this one's called Iron. There we go. And I'll make sure this one's called Hat. Cool. So I'm just going to save. Actually, I'm going to make a new. I'm going to save a new scene. I'm going to make this. I'm going to save as. I'm going to make this my new render file. So Monopoly _render. So if you had one file with all of them, you can start here. Just make sure you've converted them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that battleship piece we saved, the final one. I'm going to bring it into here. So the way you do that, and you guys might need to do this for your projects, is I go File, Import, Merge. I'm not going to click Import because that needs SPX files. Merge lets us do 3ds Max files. So I'm going to click Merge. I'm going to locate where I put it, which is in here. So there we go, Battleship_final, and even gives you a little thumbnail there you can look at. Open. It's going to give me this dialog that will let me choose things. Usually it gives you everything in the scene here. So like if you had cameras, lights, other object, it'll all be shown here. We don't need to worry about that. There was only one thing. We made all of our objects one 3D model. So I only need to click that and hit OK. And there we go. It's brought it in. So now we have our 3 pieces in the scene. You can see the scale's a little different. That's okay. We can match the scale when we start thinking about our proper units. Now, setting up for Arnold. We kind of went over this in week 1. So that's just making sure we go to rendering, render setup, or pressing F10. And we want to make sure that we have our production rendering mode set to Arnold and our active shade here in the target. When you select active shade, make sure that's Arnold. So I'm going to keep it an active shade for just now, which is good. And Arnold. So active shade and Arnold there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do firstly, I'm going to make the board. A Monopoly piece board. So I've got a reference that you should download in resources. You can see here. So the board should be pretty easy. I mean, it's just a square. It's a box, and we're going to put an image on it. And the image is also provided in the resources. What I did is I actually went and looked up the dimensions of it. Let's make our board first, and we'll use the board and the real dimensions of the board to scale these down by eye to get them the right size. So we're going to go create, box, just drag some initial thing out. And right, so our length in meters is going to be 0.508, width length 0.508, width, and the height is probably not going to be high at all, like 3 centimeters. That's a lot higher than I thought it'd be. I need another 0. There we go. Cool. So you can see by the scale of our board, that's a real Monopoly piece board size. You can tell by that our pieces are far too big, but that's okay. We'll scale them down shortly. So I'm going to center my board, 0, 0, 0, and I'm just going to hide everything else. I'm going to select my board, right click, hide unselected, get rid of them. And the first thing we're going to need to do this board is actually put a UV map on. Now, a UV map is a map that tells 3D software what to display on polygons. We're going to go over a lot more next week. That's going to be next week's topic. But for this one, we're just going to do a bog standard base one. You've actually already done a little bit of UV mapping when we got the picture of our Monopoly piece, the battleship. When we took that in, that was actually applying a UV map. And we're going to do the same again, but we're going to put the board piece on this. So I'm going to go over to the modifier list, and I'm going to select, maybe I'll do just a standard UVW map. Okay. If I press M to bring up the materials, you can also click here to grab your material editor. Just ignore this. These are all my old ones from another file. So I'll just go to here. You'll see it like this. I'll come out with nothing. The material we're going to use is the Arnold standard surface material, which is in here. So Arnold there, and then I've got surface, and then standard surface. So I can double click and it'll put it in, or I can just click and drag and put one out. And let's be smart. Let's call this Monopoly board. Cool. And we're going to assign a texture for its base color. So a few ways. You can actually just click on maps, then bitmap, and then it'll give you an option. The way I like to do it, because I'm lazy and it makes more sense for me, is with Windows you can just, we've got it there, our board there. I can just drag it and drop it straight into the material editor. So I'm going to get rid of that one. I've got my one here. You can double click this to open it. Well, make it a little bit bigger. I like doing that just so I can see and I know what's what. And then the way this works is we pump in our images into these different channels here. And we're using base color, which could also be called diffuse. Other materials will call it diffuse. In the standard surface shader, it's just called base color. So I'm just going to drag that into base color. And then there we go. We can see that this material now has that as its base color. This image as its base color. Okay, and what we're also going to do is apply it to this material, this object here. So again, we did this with the when we made the Monopoly piece background. But we can do it either by clicking here, assign material to selection with that selected, or we can take this and just drag it onto it. Either way, we'll see it's now white. We can't see anything in the viewport. That's because we need to click on this image, click it there, and then this bit up here, we have show shaded material in viewport. And there we go. Clicking that, we've got it. Now, this UV map actually doesn't matter too much because by default, that one polygon surface is going to take a basic square image. Because it's perfectly square, we're lucky that we didn't really need to do any UV mapping on this one. But next week, we're going to talk about what to do and how to make that work properly. Okay, now I'm going to bring back my other pieces. So I'm going to unhide all. And we can really see now that our pieces are not the right size at all. So that's fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to scale these objects down. Now you could do it this way, just by pressing R to get the scale tool and drag it down. This can cause a lot of problems with other objects and other scenes because the object scale doesn't stay relative. It's going to be fine in this instance. Just be aware sometimes that when you scale your finalized object, while different objects up and down, it can start mucking things up. But in this instance, it's going to be perfectly fine. So we're just going to select one, hit R, and scale it. Whoa. That's because I've accidentally changed this here. I don't know how I managed that. But if you ever notice your things are scaling a bit weird, just go up here and make sure you have uniform scale on. And it's all good. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of look at my reference firstly. Here. Just to get a feel so I can see that a battleship piece kind of would fit into color up here, the box. And it's just kind of giving me a nice reference for the sizes of the pieces. So, with that in mind, let's actually just kind of move that and scale it down, get it to the right size. So, yeah, maybe something like that. Now, this battleship piece is on 0. Its bottom is on 0 on the Z-axis, which is fine. I'm actually going to move instead of moving the pieces up, I'm just going to move the board down so that the top of the board is going to be zeroed. Like that. So it will sit on the surface. So I think that's about right. I'll get the hat now. I think the hat's about there. Where's the iron? Iron's over here. Move that over. And scale it down. Do something about that, I think. A little bit bigger. Oops. Maybe something about that. Cool. I'm going to move them and put them next to go. Just kind of roughly put them in place. Okay. Right. So, what I'm going to do is just kind of quickly make a composition. So I just want to group them nicely, make them look nice. You can move them however you want. We might talk about composition a little bit for your projects, just how to make sure that you get a really nice kind of looking image. It's using some photography concepts in 3D just to really help make your renders go that extra bit further. Alright, something like that. Cool. Now, we're going to make a camera next. And I can just go to here, create, and then over here we have camera. And then I can create it and make it. I always like to, what you can do is you can actually put your viewport in kind of a angle that you like. And then what you can do is press Control C, and it makes a camera. So I can see down in these viewports that now I've got a camera looking at the scene. All right, and what I like to do is I like to have one of these bottom viewports. I usually have like front, left, and then a camera. So on this one, I can middle click to activate it and press C, and it will go to the camera, which is great. Good stuff. And I'll press F4 on it so I can see what it's seeing. All right, now what I also like to do is in our render setup, let's firstly, in common, let's make sure we change our output size. So we're going to do a standard 69 HD render, but I'm going to do a 720 one. So in this output size, you get all your different options. We're going to do HD TV. So it's currently 1920 by 1080. Let's make it 1280. This is actually our active shade, so we could even go a bit lower. I think we should. Let's click 480. But as long as this is now 16:9 aspect ratio, which is good. So either of these will always have the same aspect ratio, so that's fine. Let's keep it 480 by 270 for the moment, just for our active shade. Click that, all fine. We can just cross out of that. Now what we need to do is we want our viewport to be in that same resolution, because I could drag this and then this has changed the aspect ratio. So what this viewport is seeing, even though it's looking through the camera, it's not going to be the same aspect ratio, which means I can't really tell what the render is going to look like exactly. In this viewport, middle clicking it, I'm going to go Views, Viewport Configuration, and then we have this thing called Safe Frames on this tab up here, and I'm going to go Show Safe Frame in Active View. Now I'm going to click Apply. So now we see whatever I do to this scale, it's going to keep the right aspect ratio. So I always know that the render is going to look exactly the same as that. So I'm just going to make it like that. There we go. Cool. Now you can see I can bring up my active shade up here. Click that. And yeah, so you should get something that looks like that. Or maybe not. This has actually got the materials that I made before. Ignore my one, my render. Your one should look, I'd imagine they all look a bit more like this. Not that one. That's actually the material we're going to make. We're going to we'll make an underplane that will be kind of a table that the board could be sitting on. So to do that, let's just zoom out a bit, make a new plane. Just going to make it about that big. But actually, I'll center it first. 0, 0, 0. Move it down a bit. There we go. And I'll press Z, it can focus. Nice. Now I'm going to make a material. Press M, bring up material editor. I'm going to drag in a standard surface again. Let's double click and then call this one table. And on this one, I'm going to bring in your resources. You should have this wood planks. We're actually going to use 3 textures here for each bit. But for the moment, we're going to just do wood planks just so we can see it in the viewport. Let's pump that into the base color. And selected on this image, I'm going to go show shaded and viewport. Then I've got this selected here, the plane that we're making a table. Now we can apply it. So I can just drag, put that on there. Boom. So this UV map, we're going to make a little smaller. So we're going to go to modifier tab up here. With the plane selected, we're going to press U to skip down to them. So I'm going to use a UV W map. That's going to let me tile this. This is a nice quick way to do a UV map on simple objects like this. So what I can do is I can either change the length and width. In fact, we're going to do it that way. So this is going to define the length of that square we want to be for each one. So at the moment it's 1, let's just say maybe 0.3 by 0.3. That's probably a bit too much detail, maybe just half, 0.5 by 0.5. That looks about right. Okay, so now I can bring up my active shade and we'll have a look at what's happening. So we don't have any lighting in here yet. What we're going to do is we're going to use the same method we did for the snowman. We're going to use image-based lighting, but I'm going to show you a few different methods first. So in 3ds Max, we can bring in any light that we want. We've got this little light bulb here in the Create tab. We don't want to use photometric. We're not really going to touch photometric lighting. We're just going to stick with the standard Arnold ones. So we've got Arnold here. So if you check Arnold here, you only get one option, which is an Arnold light. But we can do a lot of settings with this light. So with that Arnold light selected, I can just click into the viewport and it will make a light. And then I can move it around. This one's a targeted light. So you can see I can move this around and I can point to where it's looking. And you see we can't really tell what's going on. That's because we need to have the active shade up. If you have the active shade up, you can see what it's doing. So it will try and render everything out. So what we're going to do now, just play with the lights. Go into the modifier. So with the light selected, go into the modifier list. And I want you to play around with some of the values. You should have an options here. Type. Play around with these, see what the difference is. So I have a point light. That's kind of just going to be this ball. There is an option so you can see it, which is... Okay, so you can see by the reflection where the light is. So this is an interesting tidbit. Arnold apparently is bugged in 3ds Max where you can't click this anymore to show the light shape in a viewport. You can see the reflection of the light shape, but not the light shape. It turns out that when we're going to do this later, if you want to make lights in your scenes and actually visibly see the light, you're going to have to make a mesh light. So I'm just going to kind of quickly tell you how to do that. So say in your project you're making a LED or something, like an LED cylinder. So I'm just going to quickly make a cylinder. Now what you can do is you can make a light, an Arnold light, click it into the viewport, and then change it to a mesh light. Then the mesh that you click, you get an option here, you click it, and then click the shape. Now what that's done, so this is now a light source, and then what I'd also have to do, within the material editor, you can make your standard surface, and then over here in your standard surface, you would just have to turn up the emission, which is here. So standard surface emission, if I turn that all the way up, woo, I'm not sure how much, I'll just say 100 for just now, but if I put that on this object, you can see, there we go. So if you want to have an actual shape with a light, that's how to do it. I don't think I need the emission that high. Not that we're doing anything here, this is just to show you how we're going to have to do it later. Yeah, so I can just turn that down a lot because I only need it to look white on the screen. There we go. So, and then that way with this light I can change the values. So I could up the intensity. But anyway, that's the way to make, if you want to have an actual shape for your light in the scene, that's how we do it in Arnold. So that was just a quick side note. Still have a play around, keep playing with different lights. Quads are quite nice because you get a nice kind of even, kind of a big even lighting. So yeah, just play around, get a feel for it, the kind of things you can do. You can change the color of the light as well, which is kind of fun, as though you're putting a gel on the light, which is pretty cool. So yeah, feel free to play around there and get some different lighting just to get a feel for it. Once you've done that, you can either keep them and keep going with your lighting. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to delete them. And we're going to do image-based lighting like before. Image-based lighting is just a really good quick shortcut to get good lighting just using one image. So if I press 8 to bring up the environment and effects, and if I click into environment map and then click bitmap, I can go to, if you go to your resources, I should have put in this reading room underscore 4K HDR. We're going to use that. Click OK. Now, if I click the active shade, you can see, boom, really good lighting, really quick, realistic lighting. And we're going to work from this. You can tell from our little active shade viewport here that our materials aren't looking very realistic. Both the board and the table are far too shiny, so we're going to need to take care of that. Let's maybe start with this board. So if I look at my reference, you can see that it's specular. It's kind of got a bit of specular and it's kind of bumpy. So we're going to use that specular roughness map to kind of mimic that bumpiness over the top of the plastic. So firstly, I'm gonna just angle. I'm gonna make sure I'm on my top viewport. I'm just gonna angle around, just so where we have a light source, so I can kind of see this shininess kind of really well. Now if I bring up my materials with M, the material editor. So we've only got these ones at the moment. Now, if we double click and select our Monopoly board material, we've got all our options here to play with. Now, I have a feeling our roughness is going to be quite higher. So you can see here, watch what happens when we increase the roughness of the specular map. You can see it really kind of goes to a more of a matte finish. We don't want that with our reference. It looks more, it's kind of in between. It's kind of shiny, but not completely. When you're making materials, it's always good to have real world references and just kind of go back and forth and play with the values until it looks good. I have a feeling we might be somewhere about 0.5, but we're going to have to put a map on it to bring it down. So maybe I can even bring down, you can see what happens when I bring down the value. It just kind of brings down the intensity. We're probably going to want it about there, but we're actually going to use a map to define that roughness. And we're going to use, in here, you should have plastic damaged gloss. If you drag and take that in, and then what you're going to do is pump that into the specular roughness. Okay, now what we can do is play with, if you click back onto the material, play with the specular amount, the value of it. We'll be able to see what's going on. So if I zoom in, just so we can start feeling what's going on here, we can now play with this general value and see what we're getting. So you can see this is very kind of, it's a bit too big. I can see where the map is, but I think the map's a bit too big. So what we're going to need to do is click on this map, this image here, and we can change how much it tiles. We can do that over here. So we've got cropping and placement. We've got 1 for the width and 1 for the height. If I change that to 4 for each of these, it will repeat that 4 times. So it'll mean it'll be kind of smaller on top of it. And I think that might be a bit better than our preview. I'm also actually going to increase my preview size so I can see what's going on a bit better. So I'm going to cross out of this in rendering, render setup. It's going to be my active shade viewport 720. So 1280 720. Now when I press that, I'll get a much bigger image. It'll take a little bit longer for it to process, but it just means I can see a bit more detail while I'm playing around here. And I'm just moving the boxes around just so I can get the right kind of feel. So let's just see how that's looking. Yeah, that's kind of nice. We're getting a nice kind of damaged texture on top. Looks pretty good. I kind of like that. Let's just view it from this angle. Or I can middle click down here to get the camera again. And I'll just kind of see how it looks for that angle. So I'm not really getting much reflections here, so maybe I'll go into here and maybe bring this up a bit. I'm also going to do a top coat. Now, I've got a map in here called Stains Liquid. Everything in real life generally isn't perfect, so you can get these maps that are kind of smear maps, just like Grub. You know, if you look at anything you own that's plastic, you often get a kind of smeary coat on top of it. It's just you know, muck and gunk. But if we take one of these, so what we're going to do is take that map we just put in, and we're going to put it into coat. And now that's going to use this smear map as the intensity for that coat. I'm going to change the roughness. We don't want it to be exactly like this. It's super shiny. So if I scroll, oops, not in there, in this board material, in the roughness here, I'm going to increase it to about 0.5. I'm just going to wait and see how that kind of looks. This is taking a while. I might turn down the scale of it again. In fact, yeah, I'm going to do that now. I'm going to cross out of this. Just because that's taken a while to render, I'm going to turn it down a bit again. So in the render setup, I'm just going to click back down to this one here. Now, yeah, it's going to be a lot quicker. I can get a feel for it quicker. I'll just zoom in. The roughness might need to change a little. Maybe take it down a bit. Just playing with the values until I kind of like the look of it. So maybe just a bit higher than that. To about there. What I'm looking at here is the reflection of this piece. And I'm just playing around with it until it's something that I like. This is the thing with architectural rendering. Yes, we're always going for realism, but sometimes we don't go exactly real. Sometimes we go for what looks nice in the image. And I kind of like that for the moment, so go for that. Now, next we're going to make a little material, chrome material. Well, I suppose it's not chrome. I'm not sure what these pieces are made out of. Maybe it's something more like lead. We're going to make that for your ones. So, in our material editor, let's drag in a standard surface. Let's call this one, we'll call it lead. I'm pretty sure they're not lead anymore. I'm not sure what they're made out of. It might be tin. I'm not sure. I'm just going to move my windows around just so I can see everything a bit better. Right. I can hold Control and click on all my pieces. Oops. I'm going to unclick. So I'm going to click that piece, and that piece. Then this is my lead material I just made here. We call it whatever you want. And I'm going to click and drag, put it on them. Assign to selection. Okay. So if I press C, it will go to the camera viewport. You can see this is just a standard one at the moment. It doesn't look metallic at all. It's because we haven't made it metallic. So let's do that. So if I double click here, I can change the materials. And it will update here so we can keep an eye on things. So firstly, let's scroll down just a little bit. And there should be a metalness parameter. Well, firstly, our base color. Let's make that kind of a bit more gray. And our specular reflections color, let's make that slightly gray as well. Not too gray. And then here you can see in advanced metalness. We're going to want to turn that up to 1. And you can see instantly it makes it look like metal, which is what we want. But we're going to have to change the roughness. This is far too shiny. This is more like chrome. If we look at a reference image of our battle piece ship here, it is not like chrome. It's not completely reflective, so it's going to be a bit more rough. Let's do that. So specular reflections, we want to increase the roughness a bit. Make sure you're doing it in specular reflections, not the base. And you can see what happens, how that changes in the viewport. Now, it's not as shiny. And I think I might have made it a bit too grey, my one. So I'm going to bring that up a bit again, the base color. So I've just clicked on the base color. I'm just bringing the values a bit back up. Just play with that grey level until it looks and feels like a Monopoly piece. There, we're getting to it. That looks pretty good. Recap there. What we did was we made our base color the color that we wanted of the metal. In fact, so there we go. Okay. Make sure you click OK. I didn't click OK. We've made our specular reflections just a bit, not completely white, a bit off-white. Our metalness we put up to 1, and we bumped up our roughness of the specular reflections to about 0.6. And that has kind of made a material that looks to me quite similar to a Monopoly piece. Alright, what I'm also going to do, so this table, let's just make that, change that a bit. What we're going to do with this table material, if I go to a different angle, so if I middle click this top viewport, so I get a perspective view back. Whoop. Oh, I'm still in the camera in the middle viewport. If that starts happening, if you start trying to rotate and it doesn't move like this, it's probably because you're in the camera. So make sure you just press P for perspective and it will get you out of the camera. Now I'm just going to go to an angle where I can see the table. Alright. This table is currently far too shiny. So we could start playing around with our specular reflections value, but what we're going to do first is bring in these maps. So we need to bring in the wood planks gloss map, so that's this one here. We're going to bring in our normal map. Normal maps tell 3D engines the bumpiness of a surface. So this is going to, you'll see the difference instantly as soon as I apply this into the normal channel. So once I drag that in, boom, it'll update. What it's done is it's now applied, yeah, you can really tell it from this angle. You can see here, the specular reflections are kind of working on the surface more. If I take this off, so if I just delete it here, you can see the difference. It looks completely flat and smooth, but then when I pump it into the normal, we get the right kind of thing here. So then I can also change the roughness. I think it's a little bit too shiny, it almost looks wet. So I change the roughness of the specular reflection in our table here. So make sure I click table. Roughness is at 0.1 in specular. We're going to need a little bit better than that. Well, a little bit higher even. Probably, yeah, I think about there, 0.4. That looks good to me. Okay. Whoops. Sometimes you click on another viewport, the active shade will try render that viewport. Don't worry about that. You just click back onto your other one. So I'm going to go back to the camera. I'll do that by clicking on this viewport, middle clicking it, and I'll go back to the camera. Whoops. Double click to maximize that. Alright. So, I'm looking at this and I think I need to lower my iron a bit. It looks like it's floating. So, I've got too many viewports. So I think I'm done with the materials for now, so I'm just going to minimize that. I'm going to look at my iron. Press Z to focus on it. And my one's a little too high. So I'm just going to lower it down a bit. About there. Alright, now if I click middle click there, back to the camera. Okay. So you can see we're starting to get quite a nice render. We're going to switch to production mode. The active shade we only do while we're making materials and checking things. When we're setting up our lighting and making materials, we have the active shade open so we can see the effects quickly. But now we're going to change to production mode. So rendering, render setup. Change it to production rendering mode. And now, anyway, we'll get a lot more settings. So firstly, make sure you click on normal render. Make sure you have preview turned on. I think my values might not even be default. Yeah, I don't think these are default values that I have at the moment. I'm not sure what the default values are. They might be a bit more like that. But anyway, what we want to do, firstly, I'll talk about rays. So remember, diffuse is kind of our base color. specular, transmission, and subsurface scattering. Now, for each of these, we can tell the computer how much samples to use, and what that means is kind of how many rays. You can see here, if I hover over it, it tells us. So that says, controls the numbers of rays for reflected and directed radiance. So yeah, it's the amount of rays that are coming out for each pixel. We're going to talk about some more advanced things later on, but just note the higher, the better quality, but we don't want to put them too high. We want to find a balance where it looks right, but it's still fast enough. We don't want it to take forever, basically. Our ray depth tells the renderer how deep the ray should go. This is kind of more important on transmission, because transmission means how see-through things are. So if you think of like a glass, the rays need to go quite far to be able to see things that are behind it and through it. So for that, the depth is quite high. When shadows don't look right, sometimes we need to increase the depth as well. But anyway, what we'll do for the moment is if you click preview here, that just makes them all -3, so it makes it much quicker. So when you do our final render, we usually untick that and then it will do it all. This camera anti-aliasing here, this one controls all of them. It's kind of a multiplier for all of them. So if that's 4, this one kind of multiplies it, so it's actually going to be 12. I think its default is 3. We'll keep it as that in a moment. But anyway, what I want to do is click preview though for the moment, and then hit render. And that's going to bring up your render window, and you're going to see it working away. Firstly, it will do a pass, will be a preview, and then it will start kind of going in and figuring out the fine details. And now you can see these squares represent a processor. So on the machines that you're using, if you're in RGU, you'll see it has 4 because there are 4 cores. You can see my one is an i7 with, I think, 8 cores, so there's 8 of these. But the better the processor, well, the quicker it will render. So yeah, this is cool. This is rendering nicely. If shiny things look a bit noisy, so you see this noise here. If shiny things look noisy, that means specular. You need a bit more specular samples. If shadows aren't looking right, you need better diffuse samples, more diffuse samples, or the depth might need to go a bit better. If you have see-through things and there's black bits on the see-through things, that'll be the transmission, and you'll need to increase the samples and the ray depth. But we'll talk a bit more about that in advanced rendering. So this is looking not too bad. Once this preview is turned off, it will be a really nice render, but it's going to take a while. I'm actually happy with the values here at the moment. These will be fine. You'll notice though, in my final one that I did before, the one I did earlier, we've got this depth of field. We've got a blurry background and a blurry foreground. I'll tell you how to do that. That's a really good technique to get scale. So these things look a lot smaller when you have that kind of tilt shift effect. So I'll tell you how to do that. Now, the way to do that, so I'm just going to cancel my render. So you'll have this box here that will say rendering. You can cancel that if you don't want it to render anymore. Now, the way to do that, to get that effect, is with your camera. If you select your camera, you can see your camera has this little box here. This is where it's pointing to, but it can also work as where the focal plane will be. So if you remember in interactive multimedia, we talk about focal planes. I talked about focal planes. That's where this camera is focused. So it is down here. What I can do, just to make sure it's where I want, I can click on this. I could either just move it to the battleship piece, but I'm going to click this point here. I'm going to click a line up here, and then click a line on the battleship. X, Y, Z, yep, okay. And now the focal plane should be exactly on this battleship. Now, if you click that, now if we look at our f-stop is 0.5, so that actually should mean it will look pretty blurry. Let's just have a look and see that. So I'm going to click render. If you press F10 to get your render settings up and then hit render, or you can press F9. Oop, I'm not looking through the camera, so I'm going to press escape to cancel that render. I'm going to cross out of that. Middle click this viewport down here, and then press render. I'm going to see if that f-stop makes the kind of effect I'm looking for. Oh, my aperture is actually 0.8. Sorry. So anyway, I'm going to see how that looks. So I think that might be a little too much. It looks like everything else is, I want my focal plane to be a bit wider, a bit deeper. I want a deeper depth of field. This is a very shallow depth of field. So yeah, I'm going to press escape to cancel it. And I'm going to play with this value. Let's put it up a bit, maybe 16. Let's try that. Hit render. I should really be doing this in active shade, just to be a bit quicker than production mode, but I think it'll be fine with 16. Yep, I think that'll probably be fine. So yeah, just make sure you have it enable depth of field on. Play around with your f-stop to get a blurry depth of field. Well, just so that you actually have a depth of field. And that will really help sell the scale of the image. Okay, and I'm going to let that render. Okay, so I have a final render here. This didn't take too long on my machine. I'm not sure how long it'll take on the computers at RGU. But I'm going to show you something that we can quickly do to just kind of enhance this image a little. When things coming out of 3D, they come out flat. It's almost like a raw image on a camera. A lot of professional cameras shoot in what we call RAW. That just means they haven't done any post-processing onto the image. With smartphones these days, when you take a picture, you don't realize there's about usually heaps and heaps of post-processing going on the images to make them look better. You'd be surprised even now there's artificial intelligence in half of the images you shoot on your phones these days, doing lots of things to make it look better. But we are going to do it the good old-fashioned way. We don't have any AI to help us out for this. So it's pretty flat. What we'll do is bring it into Photoshop and play around with it a little bit. Later on, we're going to talk about more advanced things, advanced post-processing to really kind of crank up your images and the quality. But for this one, we're just going to do a very simple kind of bump up the contrast a little. So I'm going to save the image. So once you've got your final render dialog here, you've got the little save image button up here. If you click that, put it somewhere smart. I'm just going to put it here. Let's say final_render. Call it whatever you want. But we're going to make sure we use a file format that will keep a lot of the bit depth in the image. So we don't want to do JPEG because it'll compress it. We don't want to do PNG because it will also compress it quite a lot. We want a image extension that's going to save all of that information. So one that's very good for this is TIFF. We also have EXR, which can be good. EXR we'll use later, but for just now, let's use a TIFF. And let's just save it there. So we're calling it final render, making sure it's a TIFF, and save. And up here we get some options. We're going to choose 16-bit color and click OK. Now, open up Photoshop, and we want to go File, Open As. We're not going to do File Open, we're going to do Open As. And we're going to find wherever that was saved. Okay, locate where you've saved yours. My one's here. I'm going to click on it, and then over here in next, just above Open, I can choose what I want to open it as. And I'm going to choose Camera Raw. So this is now going to open this image as though it's straight out of a very good camera. And when doing that, it will give us up the Camera Raw tools in Photoshop. I'm just going to scale that down. That was on my other screen. You should get something that looks like that. That means we get all of these really cool quick tools to enhance this image. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look up the histogram. Everything's not too bad, but I'm going to bump up the contrast firstly. Like that. So just take the contrast and slide up the wheel a bit. And I think that's going to help a little bit already. The highlights, I'm just going to play around. Maybe take them down a bit. Shadows. Shadows maybe I'll take down just a tad. The whites, I'm going to take down a little bit. The blacks, take that down just a tiny bit. Now the vibrance, I'm going to pump up just a little bit. I might take the saturation a little bit down. So don't worry about all of these values right now. I've been doing this for a while, so I kind of get a quick good feeling for what it will need. Have a play around at least, get a feel for it. Maybe take the temperature just a little bit down. You can click this button here, which will toggle before and after. So you can see we're getting a lot more out of our image with that. I might just zoom a little bit in. And I'll maybe go over to detail up on this tab up here. Might just sharpen it a little bit. Just a little bit. If I hold Alt and then drag masking, I can see where that sharpening is going to be. And then maybe I'll just do a little bit of luminance noise reduction. Just a tiny bit. Okay. Don't worry about all of that too much. This is just, for me, very quickly showing you some ways you can instantly enhance your image straight out of 3ds Max. So we can see the before and after. Ooh, not there. Before and after here. Just, yeah, taking a little bit extra. Or I can click Done, or I can click Save Image. We're just going to do it from here. We're not going to do anything else to this. I'm just going to click Save Image. And I'll get some options. Same location. And I'll choose the type, JPEG. Yeah, JPEG, full size. All fine. Just click Save. And now I'll save a JPEG of that, which will be much smaller. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week we will be talking a bit more advanced texture mapping.